Welcome to our daily Bible study. I am your host, Dr. Derek A. Reeves, and we're moving on through this series. We are on part 21, and this segment is going to be entitled, Fear is the Antithetical Substance. The scripture tells us that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And so it indicates then that faith is the hypostasis. Some term it hypostasis, but faith is the foundation for building all things that come into reality. Faith is the substantial, concrete evidence upon which all things stand. And faith cometh by hearing, and hearing of the rhema. The rhema is the specific words. I think I was trying to say specificity of words that flow from Logos. Logos then is the mind of God. We find in St. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Logos. The Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. The same in the beginning with God. And so the Logos then, it solidifies and it literally refers to the mind of God in discourse, or the discourse of God. And so when we look at Logos then being the discourse of God, the discourse is a lengthy conversation, or it could be a dissertative concept where one seeks to prove something, the element of the proof concerning principles or concepts. But when we deal with then the Logos as the mind of God, as the discourse of God, the rhema is simply an utterance that may release all of the discourse, some of the discourse, or maybe even a small part of the discourse. And so faith cometh by hearing the rhema. The rhema is simply an utterance that reveals either the partial aspect of the mind, maybe a little more of the aspects of the mind, or the mind that is engaged in a total perspective of a foundational truth. I say a foundational truth and a perspectivism because there is no human that could fully understand the total Logos of God, the complex discourse or dissertation of God concerning reality. And so at best we receive a part. At best we know in part. For we are known and we are limited. We are finite. Our minds are finite. Albeit they are very powerful and very extensive, and they can continue to grow. To what degree only God knows, but I believe that the mind is much more powerful than what we as humans have perceived it. And so again, we hear a Logos. We hear a portion of the Logos through a rhematic word, which can be a spoken word, it can be a written word, but it is a part of a dissertation, a part of a discourse. And so the rhema is a specific word, a word of specificity. And so if faith cometh from hearing a rhema, then we have to understand that the counterpart of that is that fear comes from hearing a rhema. Therefore, if fear comes from hearing a specific type of term that we cling to, and faith comes from hearing a specific word that we cling to that builds the foundations of our believing and trusting God, and builds the foundation for those things that we're asking for God to impart into our lives, then faith is the antithesis of the substantial reality that produces fear and our detraction from the things of God. And fear is the antithesis of the substantial reality that comes by and through faith. And so it is very important to understand that these two are like faith and negative faith. When they come together, if you're not careful, your doubt and fear can cancel out faith unless your faith overwhelms the fear and the uncertainty. And so they are like two antitheses. And when they come together, they will nullify depending on if they are of equal value, equal strength. And so what happens is if you have fear, you have faith, they come together, you're at a standstill because fear is being warred with by your faith. Your mind has now having to choose between the word that stands on God's terminology or the word that detracts from the terminology and the promises of God. And so what transpires, you have an individual then who is trusting God on one hand, but then the things of the past and all of the things of his experiential past conflict with the faith. And the more he climbs, the doubt brings him back down. And so in many cases, what happens, there is what we would call a static and a concentrated effort that keeps you locked in a stasis that prohibits success. Fear then is an inhibitor of success, movement, and growth. Faith is a perpetuator of movement, growth, and the expansion of boundaries within God. And so what transpires again, you start climbing because of faith. You start growing because of faith, because faith produces substantial evidence. Faith is the substance and the evidence of things hoped for. The fact that you continue to stand on it, anticipating it to happen, is the evidence that God is now revealing. Because the more you see, the more transpires. And the more that transpires, the more you hope and the more you believe. Faith does just the opposite. Again, fear is the antithetical substance. Faith does the opposite of what fear does. Fear does the opposite of what faith does. Fear erodes your capacity and your ability to trust in God. Fear is antithetical substance, which means it causes the evidence to deteriorate. It takes away your boldness. It takes away your capacity to trust God. It takes away your capacity to be trustworthy. And so, fear, faith, they are the flip side of the coin. One is substantial reality. The other is the negation of substantial reality. And that's why fear must be understood, because fear can be subtle. Fear can be intermingled within our minds and our hopes, and specifically within our emotions. And always remember, emotions ex movere, ex movere. They move us out of a locale. They can move us out of a mental position, a mental stance. And so fear and emotion moves us from one place to another. It moves us to respond from the position in which we are moving. And if we're moving in fear, then it always moves us to counterproduce, to counteract, or to oppose faith that brings the promises, faith that brings the understanding and the trusting, and faith that enables the word to construct, or for you to construct the image that opens up and that causes you to gain an understanding once the mind opens and can see all that God is doing. I thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Dr. Derek A. Reeves, and this is our daily Bible study. Until next time, God bless and keep you.